Well, welcome to the True Man Podcast. So much of the time we carry around a lot of negativity, old wounds, or maybe even resentment towards a situation or a person. One thing I know that will lead toward a life of frustration. So, on this episode of the True Man Podcast, let's talk about forgiveness. Today, I want to welcome to the show Rob Scott. Now, Rob is a certified expert on forgiveness and finding unresolved conflicts in people's lives that are negatively impacting them. He's helped many clients achieve life transforming results and is on a mission to help the whole world through the science of forgiveness. I love that. Welcome to the show, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you very much for having me. I love talking about forgiveness.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about that today. In fact, I think forgiveness is such an important topic, but and let's face it, Rob, getting there typically starts from the school of hard knocks and having a little baggage typically attached to it as well. So in talking with you, I think that's how you've arrived at this point where you become a forgiveness expert. So let's circle back. Tell us about your story and the wound that occurred to you really at a very young age that's a good starting point before we jump into where you're at in this whole forgiveness thing today. So
Yeah.
Tell us a little about your story.
So my story, I grew up, in Christian household. I don't know if, what your listeners are, but I'm a Christian. I'm a man of faith, and forgiveness was actually a big part of my family. My parents made sure that, we asked for forgiveness when we wronged someone. We apologized, and we gave forgiveness when someone asked for it. And so I thought I was pretty good at it. But my childhood was not all that pleasant. My parents got divorced. My dad remarried. Kind of a Cinderella story for me and my brother and whatnot. But won't go into details. But I've always been a very angry person. Like in my childhood, rage was a big thing for me. I was always boiling underneath, and
I can relate to that.
Yeah, maybe a few of your guys could relate to that. And growing up, just really blocked out a lot of my childhood because I couldn't handle it, didn't want to handle it. Just had a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of rage. Got married, and really was thought I was doing pretty good. I noticed my wife, walked on eggshells a little bit, but I was, working on myself, doing the best I could on my own. But there was still, I just felt like I was hitting a brick wall.
Rob, what was it? And I think this happens to a lot of guys. So this is probably an interesting thing to talk about. What was it for you when you got married, where like all of a sudden you kind of looked in the mirror, so to speak, and went, whoa, wait a second. Something's not right. And I think it's me, but I don't want it to be me because I want to have a healthy relationship. Was there something that like
it was like I'm more introspective than maybe most guys, but it was like I knew there was things that I needed to change. I knew I had an anger problem. Like I knew I had an anger problem. I was in martial arts to help with, letting off a little bit of steam and that kind of stuff. And so like when I got married, I'm like, I need to work on myself. I know I need to do this because I don't want to repeat my parents' mistakes.
Yep.
Especially my dad, because he was, in my mind, a source of a lot of the problem. And I also had my fair share of blaming my mom and everyone else around me. I started realizing it's not everyone else's fault. Started dabbling into entrepreneurship, and everyone's like, look, if there's something going wrong in your life, you probably need to look in the mirror because that's that's where it is. And I mean, Jesus talks about, don't worry about the speck of dust in the guy's eye, take care of the plank in yours first. And it sucks looking at the mirror and dealing with that plank.
It's a pretty big plank sometimes, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like ship size.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It'll
but yeah,
it'll blind you, and it sounds like that's kind of what was happening for you. But you pause, you make this pause, and you're like, wait a second. If I'm gonna have a marriage at all, I got to take action.
right. It took me like 5 or 6 years to really get any traction with that. I'd read some books on, how you can reframe how you show up on trauma, and, it's like a 63-day process. And I was like, okay, this sounds good. Maybe I can do this. I couldn't get past day one. It was like,
Yeah.
I build myself as a pretty, strong guy, being able to go and do things, but I really couldn't deal with it. Like it felt impossible, just overwhelming, impossible task that there's no guarantee of an outcome, a positive outcome,
Mhm.
even though like all the science, showed it and whatnot. But then like I went to a Change for Good event to learn about this forgiveness technique. Uh, and it could help not only with emotional stuff, but chronic pain. And I got to be the demo dummy for chronic pain.
Yeah, lucky you. That's
Oh,
usually me on the podcast, by the way, but that's not today. Not today.
well, good to hear that. Yeah. Yeah. I had this chronic pain in my back that I'd seen doctors, I'd seen chiropractors, I'd seen massage therapists and acupuncturists around the world, because I got to teach English as a second language in South Korea and in Russia a little bit. I'd gone to everyone and they could reduce it a little bit, but it was always just constantly there.
Yeah.
Well, at this, demo, this conference, went through this forgiveness technique, and turns out my body was holding on to anger, frustration, abandonment, and disassociation from when my parents announced that they were getting a divorce when I was 8. So
Mm.
imagine that, like, you know, trauma and unresolved conflicts and stuff, we know, can be charging, when we think
Yeah.
about it. It's like, dadgummit, my brother, hit me with a baseball bat or something in the past. And, we have this grudge for forever. But I never expected it to show up as a pain in my body. And after going through that forgiveness process, that pain went away like that. I mean, just completely gone. Hasn't come back either.
Yeah.
And
I mean, how many people do you think are walking around with pains like that, though? You know what I mean?
it's a lot more than people realize. It's people, and there's been studies, behind this as well. If you ever get into the adverse childhood experience tests, there's a lot of that test shows there's a direct correlation with unresolved conflicts from your childhood and physical ailments and emotional and relational issues too.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's amazing the amount of people that are walking around hurt, and carrying that hurt physically even.
So, how can one, especially from a childhood trauma like you went through, how can one begin to heal through forgiveness?
So that's a great question, and it's a process. I work with my clients, going through this process, finding a known, you know, trauma, uh, and really you're wanting to list out who are the players involved, you know, and players don't always have to be people either. It could be events, it could be
Mhm.
emotions, it could be even objects. And once you figure out, you know, who all is involved in that original trauma, that issue, uh, you need to go through a process of forgiving yourself, which most guys really stink at, from what I've learned. I know that's been
In
an
my
issue for
experience,
mine too. Forgiving the people involved, and then also giving them permission to forgive you. Um, and sometimes you need to, give, your car or whatever permission to forgive you too. I know it sounds kind of weird, but there's a process to it. It's releasing, the issue. And then, forgive yourself for all the times that you've shown up as that younger version of yourself. Because what happens is that when we experience trauma when we're kids, and even when we're adults, if it's something that we can't handle, our mind looks away, but our body holds on to it. And it creates an original file. And that file is basically, think of a football playbook. Every time you come across a similar play or event, your body, your subconscious is bringing up that playbook. And it's a crappy playbook. It's filled with negative emotions, patterns, and beliefs. And you show up with that playbook in the moment. And so if you can deal with that original file and reframe how you show up, you can give yourself a better playbook with positive emotions, patterns, and beliefs.
I'm still trying to get over Power Right Loaded from when I was a freshman in high school. Thank you, Mr. Walzik. Appreciate that.
Yep, that sounds like, you need to write a few things down and say some forgiveness statements. And that's the other part. When you do forgive, when you use forgiveness, it's not, something you do internally, speaking it, out loud. There's power in the spoken word and releasing it from your body. So
now, what's interesting? I have been challenged by this because how you're in the moment. And I don't know if this is a good way to word. I'm just going to say somebody wronged you, or you feel that they've wronged you. And the intensity of the moment is just like, well, that's it. I'm pissed. I'm going to stay pissed. I'm cutting that person out of my life. I'm never talking to them again. Da 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 da. I think we've all been there.
Oh yeah.
And so, and I'm just curious, just throwing this out for conversation. When you're in that moment and you hear yourself say that, you're actually setting yourself up for a little bit of a disaster in the end. It's actually going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt them, because in a lot of cases, they don't even know that you said that. You're just like, I'm going to cut that person out. But like, how in that moment can we just kind of stop and go, no, wait. I'm doing more harm to me than I am to them at this point. I mean, how can we stop that to prevent it from, like, if that's even possible, Rob? I don't even know.
Absolutely. I mean, so my wife and I use forgiveness on a regular basis. And I would say the first, key thing is recognizing that. I teach my clients to recognize, forgive, and reframe. So realizing that level of anger is maybe anger that you're completely justified in having. That anger is like holding $100 bill, and God or the universe, whoever you want to call it, is sitting behind you going, hey, look, I've got this nice big bank full of money I would like to give you. And you're going, nah, I'm going to hold on to this anger. I'm going to do this. And it's also like trying to kill the person by pouring gasoline on yourself and lighting yourself on fire. And you're trying to kill them by, smoke poisoning, carbon monoxide poisoning, all that fun stuff. It doesn't work. It hurts you. Like you said, it is more detrimental to you to hold on to those emotions than it is, to the person. They may, like you said, not even know that you said that and you've had those thoughts. But the most important thing is recognizing that emotion, acknowledging it, and being okay. It's like, okay, I feel wronged. This person said this or did this to me. They stabbed me in the back. They're jerks, put it nicely, sometimes. I mean, there are other choice words I'm sure that every guy has used for people who have stabbed them in the back. But once you recognize, that you have these emotions, you're like, oh, okay, I can use forgiveness to let go of this, forgiving yourself for going, I have to cut this person off. You know, this person is unworthy of forgiveness. I forgive myself for believing this person's unworthy of forgiveness. I forgive this person for stabbing me in the back and causing me to feel this anger, and wanting to completely dissolve this relationship. I give them permission to forgive me for having these thoughts. And then I give myself permission to let go. And without, this anger, I'm free to show up in love, forgiveness, and happiness. I'm free to feel love and compassion towards this person. You know, and that literally can shift how you show up emotionally in the moment. It takes a little bit of practice and getting used to it, because
Yeah.
forgiveness is kind of a lost art, and a lost skill.
But I was just listening to you describe that. And you're just describing it. And I actually felt a release as a result of hearing you describe it. Like I was
Mhm.
like, whoa, that feels good to let that off my chest. I'm not even in the
Right.
moment. I wasn't actually forgiving anybody. I was hearing you describe it. And I'm like, oh, that feels good. Like a relief
Yeah.
there. Is that weird?
Not at all. Not at all. Because when we mentally think about it, hear it, that we're going through a process in our minds. And so if there is any anger and that kind of stuff, that we're holding on to for anyone, you can absolutely feel an emotional release just hearing, someone go through a forgiveness, process. Now, I've got a group coaching, program where, we're not diving deep into things like I do in my one-on-one sessions, but in that whole process, as we're coming up with forgiveness statements and letting go and, reframing, everyone has said they've gotten some form of release, you know,
Mhm.
in their bodies and in their lives. And it's fascinating how it works. Wish I could say I understand all of the mechanics of it, but I don't. I just know it works.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the whole idea around forgiveness. And when you and I had talked a week or so ago, I said I commonly use the term a lot of times of wounding, being wounded.
Hmm.
And so I think it's important to connect those two because there is forgiveness that could come out of wounds. You've experienced this. I mean, your childhood trauma and was a wound
Oh yeah,
that
huge.
led you to discovering forgiveness.
Yeah, it it took me a while, and
Oh
like I
yeah.
said, I thought I was pretty good at forgiving, but my anger and all of the other things that I've been holding on to said otherwise. And after that, forgiveness process, remember, disassociation was part of that picture. So in essence, up until January of 2020, I was a high functioning, angry 8-year-old robot in a lot of how I showed up.
Mm.
And letting go of that and reconnecting with my 8-year-old self, and going through that whole forgiveness process, I'm no longer showing up as that high functioning, angry 8-year-old robot. I'm showing up as my true adult self. And I would wager that most people, especially men, aren't showing up as adults most of the time. They're showing up as younger, traumatized versions of themselves with all those different pictures and playbooks.
Yeah, and I think in the back of a lot of guys' minds, it's gone through mine. You're like going, "Damn, I am a little angry in the moment." Like, and I'll even pause and go, "Well, why am I?" Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Yesterday, technology. I hate technology. Yesterday it was one of those things where we were trying to get into something and it's sending you a pin and I couldn't, I was trying to hit copy on the phone and hit copy and paste and it wouldn't copy and paste, and I saw dog's stuffed animal on the floor. So I punted it across the living room.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, and I hadn't actually done anything like that for a while. And honestly, it was kind of innocent in some degrees. But on the other hand, I was getting mad, man.
Right.
And I thought to myself after I kicked the toy, I was like, well, no, dude, what's that all about?
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes it's like, you know, you just for whatever reason, like you circle back in time. It wasn't so much that I couldn't cut and paste. It was like it's just some trigger in the back of your mind that all of a sudden I'm pissed. No reason.
Yep.
I'm just gonna piss, and I'm gonna kick this stuffed animal across the room.
Right.
It's like, and even I thought, well, now wait a second, what's that all about? You know?
Mm-hmm. Trying to figure out what the original trigger.
Yeah, I mean, it ultimately, just to a large degree, is a trigger from my past.
Mm-hmm.
Just like in that moment, kind of catches up to you, and it's like,
oh yeah, it's how you show up. You're showing up with that playbook. Now, if I can give another example, and so let me ask you this before I go into that. So you were pissed. So what kind of forgiveness statement would you say to deal with that pissed feeling?
Now, wait a second. See, now all of a sudden I get to play the dummy again. It's just I open myself up every time.
Oh, you're good, man.
No, so you know, I think probably the appropriate thing to do was like, you know, just in that moment, go, you know, whoa, hey, I forgive myself for getting angry there in that moment, or you know, something along that lines.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but just, you know, forgiving myself and remembering, you know, because I went through an exercise like this. I think I told you that.
Mm-hmm.
Remembering that 8-year-old innocent little kid in the Brady Bunch pants. If you've watched Brady Bunch, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, and just being able to love who that 8-year-old kid is that had a wide-eyed view of the world, and you know, was gonna take the world by storm, right? And
Mm-hmm.
until we get into our adult life, and then you think, why is everything an attack on my time? Doggone it. The password for this and that and the other thing. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so there's that. In fact, I just laugh every time at I think it's is it the Geico or the Progressive advertisements where the guy, he's the coach, he's a psychologist, and he's dragging everybody around and like, don't be like your parents. Right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I laugh every time because it's, you know, that's kind of what that moment was for me yesterday. It was
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm not saying my dad's an angry old. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I felt like I was that angry old guy in that moment. It just seemed kind of silly, right?
Right. Yeah. So forgiving yourself, absolutely. Forgiving the technology for causing you that anger would be the next
No
step.
way, man.
I know it's a hard thing to do, but
no,
that would be the next step. And then give it permission to forgive you. I know it sounds silly, but there's a relationship. You have a relationship.
silly, but completely necessary, right? Because otherwise, and I know this because I've had a little bit of a pain in my neck as of late that's kind of come back, and it's been a high stress year, so I get it. But in that moment where you're having those little anchor problems, that's where stuff gets stored. So all of a sudden you got a knot in your neck and you're like going, well, why do I have a knot in my neck? Well, because I'm pissed off.
Stress, anxiety, depression. Yeah. I mean, all kinds of stuff shows up in different, parts of your body physically sometimes. It is absolutely necessary to give whatever, body part you're holding on to it permission to forgive you for holding on to it even. But if I may share that story to kind of reinforce what you were saying. So my youngest client was a 3-year-old. Okay.
Oh.
Yep. Fear of taking baths. And I love sharing this story because it speaks to perceptions, because we hold on to perceptions in our body. Sometimes those perceptions are accurate to the truth, sometimes they are not. Well, this 3-year-old, fear of taking baths, her mom's like, hey, can you work on her? And I'm like, well, I can see if there's something going on. Turns out, yeah, there was an emotional thing going on. And her mom informed me that, well, I asked her body what she was holding on to when it took place. And it took place when she was born. Her mom informed me that her daughter was born in water and she almost died.
Oh.
Her and her husband feared for her life. Now, newborn baby daughter is perceived that mom and dad didn't love them. Those emotional charges that mom and dad had, that fear, translated to her, mom and dad don't love me. So every time that she encountered a body of water or was told, hey, we're going swimming, or, think about taking a bath, that was playing in the back of her mind, in her subconscious. Mom and dad don't want me. So no wonder she's, bawling, because that is playing in her mind, and she's not old enough to articulate that. And, most of the time we don't understand why we're showing up the way we're showing up. But once we went through that forgiveness process and reframed how she showed up when she was born, it was like night and day. Her mom, is like, hey, what do you think about going taking a bath? And with a big old grin, she's like, yeah, let's go do that.
Oh, no, come on, man. You got to tell me how you did that. How does that happen? A 3-year-old. Share.
It's literally, the focus was, taking baths. We found out what the unresolved conflict was.
Wow.
Using muscle testing. The body, God's designed us to communicate really well. What's going on, if we know how to do it. Using muscle testing kind of cuts through, all the noise and gets to the root of the issue. And we fix the emotions that are on the body. And once we, did that, then we helped her reframe. We helped her with forgiveness. She forgave herself. She forgave water. She forgave mom and dad, for the perception, that she was holding on as true, and then, reframed that to believe the truth that mom and dad love her, and, that water is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And, reassociated positive emotions, patterns, and beliefs with water. And it's amazing. It's really transformational.
Well, no, that really is an incredible story. That you're able to do that with a 3-year-old, but it makes me think of this, because most of us, I would dare say, have not had somebody like you around to break that down. And so what that creates is hurdles for a lot of people in their adult life. So what is, one hurdle, and let's focus on men for sake of discussion. So what's one hurdle that you feel like holds men back from overcoming a hurdle like maybe that you went through? Because what you went through in terms of divorce, heck, 51% of the population now is going through some form of divorce. And if kids are involved, there's going to be trauma. It's just, I haven't met anybody yet where it worked out clean.
Right.
So what might be a hurdle that's holding, some guys back from a trauma that occurred at a young age?
From dealing with it?
Yeah.
Pride.
That was easy. Mic drop. Okay.
Yeah. Here we go. Now, pride and entitlement. The idea that we should be able to just suppress it, move on, which society says to guys, don't touch your emotions, don't show emotion, just show up, do the work, provide for your family, and move on. Don't even bother processing the shit show that you went through. Sometimes it is that much.
Yeah.
But just move on. And then, pride, guys don't read directions, let alone look at a map, looking at themselves in the mirror
guilty as charged. Yeah.
And dealing with, the stuff from the past, it's a pride. It's like, oh crap, I really have failed myself and my family, if you're married, or my friends, showing up this way with anger or, anxiety or whatever it is, coming to that realization, my inner demons are negatively impacting me and those around me. It's a oh crap moment.
Yeah.
I'm just going to, a lot of guys want to just ignore it and, move on. And it's not good. It's really not good.
Yeah, I just flat out refer to that as those unanswered questions that we shove deep down in our soul. I mean, that's just what it is. And I'm probably going to answer my own question is by saying that, which is, how can people overcome those challenges? And it's probably, like I said, I just answer my own question more or less, which is you got to deal with the unanswered questions that you just suppressed, right?
Right. Honesty. I mean, telling the truth. That's, something that is hard to do, especially for guys, because, pride gets in the way a lot of times, and the truth hurts. It can absolutely be devastating sometimes.
So what's the first step somebody should try to do to overcome that pride? Because I think you're right. I think a majority of time is pride, right? Like we don't want to admit that, you mean I'm going to have to be a little vulnerable? Yeah, you're going to have to be a little vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to laugh, but I would say, the first thing is forgiveness. Forgiving yourself.
Well, I didn't mean to tee you up that easily.
But
yeah,
I mean, recognition really is the first step. But once you've recognized my pride has gotten in the way of me taking care of my crap, forgiving yourself for allowing pride to dominate, your thought process and your healing journey. And then giving yourself permission to take that first step down that path of discovery and healing, and then take action. I mean, that's the process. So first, recognition. Second, I would say forgiveness, because that really does ease a lot of the self-hate and self-mutilation and how you talk to yourself and beating yourself up, which was a big part of my life. I've wrote so many nasty things about myself and to myself, for not taking action and letting things get as bad as they did.
Yeah, that's and that's what we do. We suppress, right? I was a bit of an introverted child to a large degree, and I didn't ask questions, and I can even relate it back to the classroom now, right? So I became, not that I wasn't intelligent, but I didn't ask questions when I needed help, right? Like I was embarrassed to ask questions, and that bled over into my adult life until I went, oh, it's okay to ask questions.
And questions are great, and learning the questions to ask is a learning process, myself included. I'm still learning better questions to ask to find what's going on, why I'm showing up the way I'm showing up. I mean, I of course use my forgiveness technique to help along the way, but questions are great.
Well, it's part of the never-ending curiosity that we need to have in, I've become convinced, in our adult life. And if you ask enough questions, you too can have a podcast, but just don't compete with me. Yeah. so yeah. But I think the older that I've gotten, the more curious that I've become, because in order to live a full and happy life, I think you have to ask a lot of questions. And honestly, and I tell people this all the time, And it's why you need to be around a tribe of men, because everybody's at a different level. And if you can put
Mhm.
yourself in position with people that have had some degree of success, at least in one area, right?
Right.
Then you can ask them, you can be curious, and you can find out. And that is a good thing. And that's why, having good communities to be around are, I think, just so critically
Absolutely.
important. I think that helps the forgiveness process, because you find other people that have forgiven and been able to move on.
Yeah. And you're helping one another to become authentic, your
Yeah.
true authentic self.
Yes.
Your podcast is the True Man podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Being a true man is being authentic to who you are, being able to look back at the trauma that you've gone through and it no longer impacting you and causing you to show up as that younger version of yourself, but rather show up with all the knowledge and wisdom that God's given you in your life.
Right. You find forgiveness in your wounds, because essentially what they turn out to be are growth opportunities. And
Absolutely.
it, for some of us, just takes a little longer to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, it took me nearly 30 years.
Yeah. Listen, when I have these conversations with guys, it would, I don't think I've ever had anybody go, yeah, I thought about it overnight and I'm good.
No,
No,
never,
yeah,
never, never.
I've never, I mean, maybe something as simple as like what to get at the grocery store, but that's a whole different story. I mean, when you're talking about life, we're just affected in so many ways, and it's just much deeper than, an inch deep. I mean, most of what we've talked about today are these things that occur at the subconscious level.
Yeah. And
And they'll hold you hostage.
they will. And you may not even realize it. I didn't. No, for the longest time. And my encouragement to your listeners is don't let, you know, yourself get to the rock bottom of whatever you're dealing with. Like I've
Mm.
had clients guys specifically, who came to me. It's like, can you help with anger? And they had gotten to the point, in their lives, in their marriages, where it was such a problem. It was about to cause,
Yep.
a major catastrophe in their
Mhm.
life. Don't let it get that far. It's not worth it. Your pride is not worth it. No.
Yeah, and it's
And
the basis for a lot of relationships that get destroyed, unfortunately. And but once that explosion occurs, it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
very good visual. I like it. Uh, and that's
Yeah,
very
I
true.
wish I could claim it, but I heard that once or twice. Yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So Rob, tell us. This has been fantastic discussion around
Absolutely.
forgiveness. I've really enjoyed it. So as we begin to wrap up here, somebody may go, yeah, wow, I need some forgiveness in my life. So how can somebody get a hold of you?
The best way is to go to my website, the www.theforgivenesslink.com. There you can book a complimentary session. We can have a conversation to see what's going on in your life, see where you want to be, and what it might take to get there. I also have a group coaching program for those who want to learn how to forgive, and go through that process in the moment. Um, and you can find the link to that as well on my website, the Forgiveness Lifestyle.
And
Uh,
I'll put all that in the show notes to make it easy for people to get a hold of you and find you.
yeah.
So awesome. This has been great. Any last piece of advice you may have thought of that you might want to leave?
Uh, for guys, take a look at yourself in the mirror. Uh, give Just choose one area of your life that you may feel like you could use some improvement, and spend, yeah, 10-15 minutes on things that, come up in your mind, and write them
Yeah.
down. Write this stuff down, and then start forgiving. Forgive yourself, first. it's really worth it. It's not worth holding all of that weight and negativity against yourself.
That is a great piece of advice to leave everyone with. And with that, we'll say thank you, Rob. We appreciate
My
you
pleasure.
being here. We appreciate this conversation around forgiveness, and we'll have to have you back soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right.